The world does not begin with a roar, it begins with a hush. Before the first traffic light flickers to life, before the digital hum of 1,000 urgent notifications pierces the silence, there exists a sliver of time, a microscopic gap between the final, fading remnants of the subconscious dream state and the encroaching demands of the waking world. This is the holy threshold. It is a moment of profound, suspended animation where the air itself seems to thicken with potential. Most souls traverse this threshold in a state of frantic collision. They wake as if struck by a lightning bolt of anxiety, their minds immediately lunging toward the jagged edges of yesterday's unfinished conflicts or the looming, shadowed architecture of tomorrow's pressures. They do not wake, they erupt. They are startled by the alarm, startled by the sudden light, and startled by the immediate weight of their own identity, which they carry into the new day like a heavy, rusted suit of armor. But observe the paradox. In this precise moment of stillness, before the tongue has tasted the morning's first bitterness, before the brain has processed the first demand, one is not yet shackled. One is, for a fleeting heartbeat, a blank slate. The room is quiet, the dust motes dance in the early light, and the consciousness is as pliable as unbaked clay. To rush through this moment is to abandon the most important meeting of one's life. It is the moment the artist stands before the pristine, white canvas of a new 24 hours, brush in hand, yet most choose to close their eyes and stumble forward, painting by habit rather than by design. The morning is not a routine. It is a laboratory of creation, and the threshold is the door through which one must pass with intention or remain forever a servant to the momentum of the past. Why is this morning interval so uniquely powerful, and how does it determine the trajectory of the human experience? To deconstruct the morning is to examine the mechanics of consciousness itself. When the mind emerges from REM sleep, it is not yet hardwired into the defensive protocols of the ego. The frontal cortex, the seat of our executive function, our worries, and our social masks, is still in a state of semi-permeable grace. It is here that we find the intersection of the spiritual and the material. The psychological reality is that we are creatures of momentum. The neuroplasticity of the human brain dictates that the first thoughts we entertain serve as the prime for the rest of the day's cognitive functioning. If those first thoughts are anchored in lack, the anxiety of a missed deadline, the resentment of a perceived slight, the fear of inadequacy, the brain begins to scan the environment for evidence to support those fears. This is the phenomenon of confirmation bias. The mind, having been set to fear, will effectively ignore the opportunities for grace and highlight every obstacle as proof of one's limited reality. How do we break this? We must move from a reactive state to a proactive decree. We must acknowledge that the subconscious mind is not a critical thinker, it is a recording device. It does not argue with the input it receives. If one feeds it, this is going to be a stressful, difficult day. The subconscious, acting as the loyal architect, begins to design that exact reality. It directs the nervous system to remain in a state of high alert. It narrows the field of vision, and it restricts the capacity for creative problem solving. Therefore, the morning pause is the act of seizing the controls of the internal broadcast. To sit in the stillness is to perform a radical act of spiritual reclamation. It is the acknowledgement that reality is not something that happens to us. It is something that we generate from within. If the first thoughts are the seeds, then the morning is the soil. We have spent years unknowingly planting seeds of chaos, following a blueprint drawn by fear. But the law of the universe is impartial. It does not care if the seeds are sown in wisdom or in ignorance. It will produce a harvest regardless. The shift, then, is a shift in stewardship. We must stop being the victims of our own subconscious habits and become the deliberate, sovereign authors of our internal landscape. Consider the story of Elias, the keeper of the clockwork. Elias lived in a towering lighthouse, situated upon a cliff that overlooked a vast, turbulent sea. For decades, Elias believed his sole duty was to react to the storms. Whenever the winds howled, he would pace his small room, his hands trembling as he checked the locks and bolted the shutters against the inevitable onslaught of the waves. He lived his life in a cycle of bracing for impact, his face perpetually lined with the anticipation of damage. One morning, just as the sun began to bleed gold across the horizon, Elias found he had exhausted all his strength. He could no longer fight the storm. He collapsed into his heavy oak chair and, instead of running to the windows to check for cracks, he closed his eyes and breathed. He imagined his lighthouse not as a fragile shell at the mercy of the sea, but as a lighthouse that was the source of the light, an immovable pillar of stone that dictated the nature of the surroundings. In that quiet stillness, he began to speak not to the storm, but to his own heart. He spoke of the lighthouse's inherent strength. He spoke of the calm that existed deep beneath the surface of the churning ocean. He realized that for all his years, he had been using his words to describe the storm, and in doing so, he had been fueling the very gale he feared. He had been a magician who didn't know he was holding a wand. That day, the storm did not vanish instantly, but Elias's relationship to it changed entirely. He stood in the center of the room, anchored in the truth of his own immovability. Because he was no longer bracing, his hands were free. He realized that the lighthouse was not meant to keep the world out. It was meant to shine light upon it. He took up his brush, a metaphor for his newfound deliberate intention, and began to paint the interior of his world with colors of resilience and purpose. He saw that the world outside could not reach him unless he invited it in through his fears. By the time the sun climbed high, the storm had become a mere backdrop, a secondary event to the primary reality of his own sovereign peace. Elias had ceased to be a prisoner of the weather. He had become the master of the light. To embody this truth today, one must begin with the practice of the sacred pause. Before you reach for your phone, before you allow the digital world to flood your consciousness, you must claim the first 10 minutes for the architecture of your soul. Do not look for an outcome immediately. Look for the alignment. Sit in a place of comfort. Close your eyes and allow the silence to reach you. Recognize that this space is your studio. The world will be waiting for you. It is a patient servant, and it will still be there in 10 minutes. But you are the one who decides what kind of day will be painted onto the canvas of your life. Speak these words to the silence. I am the architect of my day. I choose the colors of grace, strength, and possibility. Take a moment to feel the weight of those words, not as a hope, but as a command. You are setting the frequency. You are priming the soil. You are now standing at the threshold, the brush in your hand, the canvas clear and waiting. But the canvas is not merely blank. It is waiting for a blueprint of absolute, foundational truth. For too long, the internal monologue has been a stuttering, uncertain whisper, questioning your very right to exist in greatness. You are ready to step into the studio, but you cannot paint a masterpiece if the painter believes they are broken. As we step deeper into this journey, we must address the first, most dangerous lie, the belief that you are a project requiring repair. In our next chapter, we will dismantle this illusion entirely and reveal the blueprint of your inherent, unshakable perfection. We are moving from the threshold into the very heart of the temple. Prepare to meet your true self. Observe the seeker who wanders through the marketplace of life, eyes downcast, clutching a worn satchel as if it contains the only scraps of worth they possess. They walk with a persistent, nagging hunch, a physical manifestation of an invisible burden, the sensation of being not quite enough. It is a curious paradox. The same individual who possesses the capacity to dream of empires, to feel the crushing weight of sorrow, and to soar on the wings of inspiration, simultaneously harbors the quiet, gnawing conviction that they are fundamentally flawed. They look at the partner who holds their hand and wonder, what if they see the crack in my porcelain? They look at the promotion they have earned and whisper, I am an imposter in this seat. They stand before the mirror, searching for the missing piece, the external validation, a smaller waist, a larger bank account, a more prestigious title that will finally make them whole. This is the great human masquerade, like a traveler who forgets they are wearing the very spectacles they are frantically searching for. The seeker forgets that the completeness they pursue is not a destination to be reached, but the very ground upon which they stand. The paradox is absolute. How can one be a masterpiece in the eyes of the universe while feeling like a discarded rough draft in the eyes of the self? To dismantle this illusion, one must ask, why does the human psyche cling so desperately to the narrative of brokenness? The answer lies in the architecture of our early conditioning. From the moment we are thrust into the societal crucible, we are measured against external benchmarks. We are told that our value is a variable that fluctuates based on performance, appearance, and the approval of others. This creates a psychological scarcity mindset regarding the self. If our value is earned, it must be protected. If it is earned, it can be lost. This is the root of all striving. We must ask, how does this belief function as a mechanism of control? By defining the individual as broken, the world ensures a continuous demand for external solutions, products, therapies, status symbols, and gurus, all promise to fix the perceived deficiency. The belief in one's own incompleteness is the ultimate engine of consumerism and social conformity. It keeps the energy of the individual perpetually directed outward, searching for a phantom wholeness in the shadows of the material world. To deconstruct this, we must apply the principle of original perfection. Philosophically, this posits that the soul is not an evolving project. It is an eternal, immutable fact. The universe does not make mistakes in its creative expressions. A tree is not a broken seed. It is a seed that is fulfilling its inherent blueprint. A human being, likewise, is not a collection of parts to be assembled and repaired. You are an expression of the divine, and the divine does not manifest in fragments. Your scars, those experiences of failure, loss, or shame, are not evidence of a flaw in the master design. They are the texture of the life you have lived. If you are a whole, perfect, and complete expression of the divine, then why do you feel broken? Because you have identified with the ego self, which is a narrative, rather than the true self, which is the witness. The ego is the curator of your history, your traumas, and your limitations. But the true self is the library itself, the vast, silent, and indestructible space in which those stories exist. To reclaim your wholeness, you must stop trying to convince yourself that you are good enough through external improvement and begin the internal revolution of realizing that you were never bad to begin with. You are not a repair job. You are a masterpiece. You have simply forgotten to remove the dust cloth. In a forgotten age, in the kingdom of Aethelgard, there lived a sculptor named Kalin. Kalin was a man of extraordinary skill, yet he spent his days in deep melancholy. He believed that he was incapable of creating true beauty because he possessed a single, jagged scar on his right hand, a remnant of a childhood accident. He viewed this scar as a mark of incompetence, a permanent stain that tainted every marble block he touched. One day, a mysterious traveler arrived in the kingdom, carrying a block of stone so dark and rough that most claimed it was mere volcanic waste. Kalin, in his despair, offered to sculpt it, convinced that he could not possibly ruin such an ugly thing. For months, he worked with a feverish intensity, his hands aching, his mind consumed by the need to hide the ugliness of the stone, and by extension, his own perceived ugliness. He chiseled away with violence, trying to fix the stone's natural form. But the more he fought the stone, the more it resisted, until in a moment of pure frustration, he let his chisel fall. He sat back and truly looked at the stone for the first time. He realized he was not sculpting. He was attacking. He closed his eyes, silenced his internal critic, and began to run his scarred hand across the grain of the rock. In that moment of surrender, He didn't try to change the stone. He asked it, "What do you wish to be?" The stone did not answer in words, but in the guidance of the grain. Kalin realized that the very flaws in the marble, the veins of dark mineral, the rough edges, were the true artistry. He stopped trying to fix the stone and began to reveal it. When he finished, the statue was not a pristine, polished idol, but a figure of raw, human emotion, with the very flaws he had once loathed becoming the highlights of the piece. The people of Aethelgard wept when they saw it, for it captured the essence of what it meant to be human. Kalin looked at his own scarred hand and realized it was the very tool that allowed him to understand the stone's deepest secrets. He had been so obsessed with being a perfect sculptor that he had forgotten to be a vessel for the art. The masterpiece was already in the stone. He was merely the one who unveiled it. To embody this truth today, you must perform the inventory of reclamation. Set aside 10 minutes of complete, uninterrupted silence. Take a piece of paper and write down the 3 most prominent flaws or broken parts you believe you possess. Perhaps it is your perceived lack of discipline, your history of failed relationships, or your deep-seated anxiety about the future. Look at these entries. Now, place your hand over your heart and breathe. Remind yourself, these are not indicators of a defective self. They are experiences that have passed through the field of your awareness. If you can observe them, they cannot be you. You are the observer of the flaw, not the flaw itself. Repeat this decree with absolute conviction. I am not a project to be fixed. I am a masterpiece being revealed. My worth is an eternal fact, not a negotiable result. By doing this, you are effectively dismantling the old temple of ego and building the new one on the bedrock of your inherent completeness. You are no longer seeking validation from the outside. You are generating it from within. You are moving from a state of contraction to one of expansive, joyful creation. You are now standing on the foundation of your own wholeness, but a master does not merely exist in a state of being. They must also master the art of manifestation. If you are whole and complete, why does your life still feel like a reactive scramble? Why does your word, which should be the law of your reality, seem to carry no weight? You have claimed your worth, but now you must claim your wand. In the next chapter, we descend into the engine room of the soul. We will explore the subconscious, the most loyal, dangerous, and powerful servant you will ever possess, and learn how to issue the commands that will finally align your inner world with your outer dreams. The bridge is crossed. The transformation begins. Imagine, if you will, a vast, ornate chamber carved into the very bedrock of existence, the subconscious. It is a garden of infinite fertility, bathed in a perpetual, silvery twilight, where the air hums with the static of unspoken intentions. Here, there are no locks on the doors, no guards at the gates, and no judge presiding over the court. There is only the soil. And in this chamber stands an unseen servant, a figure of profound dedication, holding a ledger of every word ever uttered by the master who inhabits the physical frame above. The paradox of the human condition is this. We walk through our days complaining of the weeds that choke our lives, oblivious to the fact that we are the ones who planted them with our own tongues. We speak into the void, assuming our words are mere breath, vanishing into the atmosphere as harmless vapors. Yet, every syllable that crosses the lips is a seed. Every sentence is a command inscribed into the soft, yielding clay of the inner garden. We walk around cursing the harvest of our own tongue, wondering why the thorns grow where we intended to plant roses, never realizing that the servant in the chamber does not care for our intentions, only for our instructions. The wand is in our hand, gripped tightly, yet we have been using it to strike at our own feet, unaware of the magic we wield. Why does the subconscious mind adhere to this rigid, literal interpretation? To understand this, one must look at the evolutionary survival mechanism of the human psyche. The subconscious is designed for efficiency and preservation. It is not an analyst. It is an executor. Its primary mandate is to translate the internal reality of the individual into the external reality of their environment, so that the two are in constant, seamless alignment. When the mind utters a word, it carries an emotional charge of frequency. The subconscious does not distinguish between a casual, sarcastic comment about being broke and a fervent, heartfelt prayer for prosperity. It perceives only the emotional resonance of the utterance and the directive contained within the thought. If you say, "I am exhausted," the subconscious interprets this as an instruction to maintain the state of exhaustion to prove the veracity of your word. It effectively rearranges your neurochemistry and your focus to ensure that your experience matches your verbal decree. How, then, does this recursive loop function? It works through the mechanism of validation. We speak a word of limitation. "I cannot, I am afraid, people are against me," and the subconscious immediately scans the environment for data that justifies this decree. It filters out the abundance and highlights the lack. We then point to the evidence, the empty bank account, the cold reception, and say, "See? I was right." Thus, the loop closes. The word becomes the reality, and the reality becomes the justification for the next word. This is the tyranny of unconscious creation. The subconscious is a loyal servant, but a blind one. It possesses no sense of humor, no irony, and no moral compass. It operates on the principle of absolute, binary obedience. To master this, one must realize that the word is the most potent technology in the universe. In ancient traditions, it was said that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with the Source. That same creative power is lodged in your throat. When you speak, you are not merely communicating. You are configuring the fabric of your own future. You are giving the gardener instructions for the next season. The question is not whether you are creating. The question is whether you are creating from a place of awareness or a place of negligence. Consider the legend of Julian, the merchant of echoes. Julian was a man who believed he was cursed by the universe. Wherever he went, financial ruin followed. He was a gifted trader, yet every deal he brokered seemed to fall apart at the final hour. He spent his evenings in the taverns, bemoaning his hard luck, telling anyone who would listen about the cruelty of the market and the inevitable failure of his ventures. His words were heavy, dripping with the resignation of a man who had accepted his doom. Unknown to Julian, he was followed everywhere he went by a shadow, a silent, spectral entity that held a stylus and a tablet. This entity was not a demon, nor a spirit, but the physical manifestation of his own subconscious intent. Wherever Julian spoke, the entity transcribed his words and went to work, weaving the web of his future based on those very descriptions. One afternoon, sitting in the dusty corner of a market square, Julian met an old woman who sat weaving a tapestry. She looked at his dejected face and asked, "Why do you weave such dark patterns for your tomorrow?" Julian scoffed, "I do not weave. I am merely describing the life I have been forced to live." The woman laughed softly. "My friend, your description is the weaving. You do not see the threads because you are standing in the middle of the loom. You have spent your life describing the thorns, so the field has grown nothing but thorns. Your word is your wand. You are pointing it at the ground, commanding the weeds to grow." Julian looked at the ground, and for the first time, he saw the shadow servant trailing him, stylus poised. He realized that the servant was waiting for his next sentence to begin the day's work. Terrified and awestruck, Julian looked at the empty, barren stall in front of him. He did not say, "I am poor." Instead, he took a deep breath, centered his spirit, and looked the servant in the eye. With the steady voice of a man choosing his own fate, he said, "I am a channel of immense value, and my work is a gift to the world." The shadow servant paused, its stylus hovering. Then, it began to draw, not thorns, but gold and light. Over the following months, the market did not change, but the people who looked at Julian did. The opportunities he had previously missed, opportunities that had been right in front of him, hidden by his own negative decree, suddenly appeared as if by magic. He had ceased to describe the lack. He had started to dictate the reality. The wand had changed hands from the victim to the master. To embody this truth today, you must adopt the practice of the silent watchman. For the next 24 hours, you are to monitor every word that crosses your lips as if your life depends on it, because it does. When you are tempted to complain, to gossip, or to issue a self-deprecating jest, you must pause. Stop the sentence midair. Ask yourself, if this sentence were to instantly manifest as my physical reality, would I be pleased with the result? If the answer is no, you have found a weed in your garden. Do not just stop speaking. Replace the command. If you find yourself saying, "I'm so tired," immediately pivot to, "I am energized and supported by the infinite life force within me." If you say, "I can't afford that," pivot to, "My supply is infinite, and I am making room for my next flow of abundance." This is not a game of semantics, it is a game of mastery. You are retraining your subconscious to look for the harvest you desire. You are asserting your authority over the most fertile soil in the universe. Do this until the pivot becomes your natural response to the world. You are now learning to wield the wand, to direct the invisible substance of your life with the precision of a master architect. But even the master architect needs the right frequency to sustain the work. You have the tool, and you have the soil, but what is the atmosphere in which these seeds must grow? You have declared your wholeness and claimed your wand. Now, you must learn to harmonize your inner song with the resonance of the universe itself. In the next chapter, we descend into the mystery of the frequency, the native tongue of the soul, and discover why gratitude is not just an emotion, but the golden key to the doors of the infinite. Prepare to tune your heart, for the resonance of your life is about to shift to a higher octave. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, obsidian lake at the deepest hour of the night. The water is so still that it acts as a perfect, flawless mirror, reflecting the infinite tapestry of the constellations above. In this state of total stillness, the boundary between the observer and the observed vanishes. However, the moment you cast a stone into this glass surface, a stone of complaint, of restless wanting, or of jagged irritation, ripples radiate outward. These waves distort the reflection. The stars, once sharp and crystalline, are fractured into chaotic shards of light. This is the condition of the human heart in its default state of lack. We live in a universe that is constantly broadcasting the frequency of abundance, a radiant, symphonic field of infinite possibility. Yet we spend our lives throwing stones of discontent into the mirror of our own consciousness. We wonder why our reality feels fractured, why the stars of our dreams are distorted and unreachable. We are not suffering from a lack of supply, we are suffering from a lack of resonance. The universe is a radio, and the dial of our soul is jammed, stuck between stations of static and dissonance. We call out for more, yet our internal signal is a broadcast of scarcity. The paradox is as silent as it is profound. We are vibrating at the frequency of what we do not have, and thus, we are structurally incapable of perceiving the abundance that is already here. Why does the frequency of gratitude function as the master key of spiritual physics? To answer this, we must deconstruct the architecture of receptivity. The universe operates on the law of resonance. You do not attract what you want, you attract what you are. If you exist in a state of complaint, you are vibrating at the frequency of not enough. The universe, acting as a perfect mirror, reflects your vibration back to you, manifesting more experiences that confirm your sense of insufficiency. How does this loop sustain itself? It is rooted in the ego's fear that gratitude is a form of resignation, that if we are happy with what we have, we will lose our drive to achieve more. This is a profound misunderstanding of the creative process. Gratitude is not a passive acceptance of the status quo. It is an active, energetic alignment with the source of all supply. When you offer gratitude, you are essentially opening the channel. You are signaling to your subconscious and to the field of infinite potential that you are a stable, reliable vessel. Why must this occur before the arrival of the new? Because if you cannot hold the frequency of abundance while in the presence of little, you will be unable to sustain the frequency of abundance in the presence of much. The ego looks at the bank account and sees numbers. The soul looks at the bank account and sees a flow of energy. Gratitude is the act of consciously shifting the dial from the static of lack to the clear, vibrant signal of sufficiency. It is the recognition that the breath in your lungs, the light in the room, and the capacity to perceive are themselves the foundational capital of the universe. How do we move from the occasional thank you to the persistent frequency of gratitude? It is a matter of neurological conditioning. By intentionally seeking out the miraculous ordinary, you force the brain to bypass its default negativity bias. Every time you consciously identify a point of gratitude, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with abundance. You are literally rewiring your nervous system to perceive the world as a place of infinite provision. You stop chasing the light and become the lighthouse. You stop begging for crumbs and acknowledge your place at the banquet of the infinite. Gratitude is the language of the Creator. It is the frequency that aligns the individual will with the divine will. In the arid province of Oros, where the earth was cracked and the sun was a relentless tyrant, there lived two farmers, Caleb and Silas. Their lands were adjacent, identical in soil and sunlight. During a season of unprecedented drought, Caleb spent his days cursing the dry sky. He stood in his withered fields, shaking his fist at the heavens, crying out for the rain that would not come. He spent his energy cataloging every dead stalk of corn, every dried-up well, and every day that passed without relief. He was a man defined by the absence of water. Silas, however, worked his land with a quiet, strange intensity. When a neighbor asked how he maintained his resolve, Silas pointed to the deep roots of his olive trees, which had survived the heat. "I am thankful for the heat," he said, "for it teaches the trees to reach deeper than the surface." Each morning, Silas would walk his dusty rows, placing his hand on the dry earth. He thanked the ground for its memory of water. He thanked the sun for its persistent light, and he thanked the wind for its ability to carry seeds. He did not deny the drought. He simply refused to vibrate in alignment with it. He held the frequency of growth, even in the absence of evidence. As the season deepened, a strange phenomenon occurred. While Caleb's fields became a graveyard of failed expectations, Silas's land began to breathe. He had become so attuned to the subtle movements of the earth through his practice of gratitude that he felt a minute, damp coolness rising from a hidden subterranean vein of water that Caleb had walked over 1,000 times. Because Silas was in a state of appreciation, his awareness was expanded, allowing him to perceive the hidden resource. He dug, and the water rushed forth. Caleb, meanwhile, remained in his field, blinded by his own anger, convinced that the universe was punishing him. Silas realized then that the drought was not a theft of his livelihood. It was a schoolhouse for his spirit. Gratitude had been the spade that unlocked the hidden well. To embody this truth today, you must adopt the alchemy of the anchor. Before you step out of your bed, and before you utter a single demand to the universe, you are to identify 3 things that you previously took for granted, 3 elements of your existence that are currently supporting your life. It could be the integrity of your own heartbeat, the structure of the room you inhabit, or the fact that you possess the capacity to learn and grow. Do not simply list them. Feel them. Let the sensation of thankfulness wash over your nervous system like cool water. When you experience a moment of tension or a bill arrives that causes your stomach to tighten, immediately utilize this practice as an anchor. Stop, take a breath, and find one aspect of your situation to bless. By blessing the challenge, you strip it of its power to limit you. You are demonstrating to the universe that you are a master of your own frequency. You are no longer a victim of the circumstances. You are the alchemist of your own reality. If this message has struck a chord within your soul, if you feel the shift from the static of lack to the clear music of gratitude, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. This act is a declaration of your commitment to the path of abundance, ensuring that you remain tuned to the frequency of your highest potential as we journey further into this sacred work. You are now learning to master the frequency of your own soul, turning the dial from the dissonant noise of the world to the harmonious symphony of the infinite. But even as you hold this frequency, the shadow of fear often creeps in, the ancient, primal dread of scarcity, the nagging terror that the river might run dry. You have mastered the inner state, but now you must master your understanding of the source. In the next chapter, we descend to the very roots of the river itself. We will confront the fear of not enough and reveal the truth of an inexhaustible, infinite supply that is flowing toward you, waiting only for you to clear the path. Prepare your heart, for we are about to dismantle the dam of scarcity forever. Observe the man standing before the open door of an empty larder. His knuckles are white as he grips the edge of the wood, his eyes scanning the barren shelves with a frantic, primal intensity. In this moment, the room is not merely a room. It is a claustrophobic cage of perceived limitation. The air feels thin, the silence heavy with the phantom weight of tomorrow's bills and next month's anxieties. This is the ache of not enough, a cold, gnawing sensation that lodges itself in the gut and whispers that the universe is a finite, stingy entity, prone to running out of essential provisions. Yet, consider the paradox of this suffering. Outside the window, the sun pours light upon the world with a profligate, uncalculating generosity. Trees drink from the inexhaustible reservoirs of the earth. The winds circulate in a closed, perpetual loop of energy. The tides rise and fall with the rhythm of a heartbeat that never tires. The universe does not hoard its resources. It is an expression of boundless, overflowing life. Why, then, does the human spirit feel so tethered to a sense of scarcity? Why does the master of the house stand shivering in the cold when the hearth is filled with the unspent fire of 1,000 suns? It is the great deception of the senses. We mistake the channel for the source, and in our fear, we choke the very flow we seek to sustain. To resolve this internal contraction, one must deconstruct the concept of supply. Why does the human psyche collapse into panic when the visible markers of wealth, money, status, employment begin to ebb? The answer lies in a fundamental misplacement of identity. We have been conditioned to view our channels as our source. We treat the paycheck, the employer, or the client as the provider of our life, rather than seeing them as the temporary conduits through which the infinite substance of the universe arrives. How does this error create the dam that blocks our own prosperity? By believing that our supply is finite and dependent upon external systems, we enter a state of clutching. This psychological state of desperation is the antithesis of flow. When we clutch, we squeeze the channels shut. We operate from a place of contraction, making decisions out of fear rather than intuition, and closing our hearts to the very opportunities that are currently moving toward us. We create a bottleneck of our own making, constructed of worry, suspicion, and the belief that if we do not fight for our piece of the pie, we will starve. Why must we shift our allegiance from the channel to the source? Because the source, the infinite, formless, creative substance of the universe, is never subject to inflation, recession, or loss. It is the raw material of creation itself. The question of how is not a matter of gathering more. It is a matter of clearing the debris. The debris consists of our inherited beliefs. Money is hard to come by. There isn't enough to go around. I am not worthy of more. These are the boulders we have pushed into the riverbed. How do we dissolve these boulders? by moving from a state of wrestling to a state of allowing. When you acknowledge that your true source is the infinite, you stop seeing life as a zero-sum game. You begin to perceive the world not as a collection of competitors fighting over a diminishing prize, but as a vast, interconnected web of provision. The river is not running dry. You are simply witnessing the water diverted by your own doubt. To clear the channel is to stand in the realization that your needs are met not because you have worked yourself to the bone, but because you are a vital, inherent part of a system that is designed to sustain you. You are not a guest in this universe. You are its co-creator, entitled to the full abundance of the source. In the mountain village of Oakhaven, there lived an ancient, blind man named Elias, who was known as the water seeker. While the other villagers spent their lives digging shallow, frantic wells in the rocky soil wells that inevitably went dry as soon as the rain ceased, Elias would walk into the hills with nothing but a copper rod. He did not look for water with his eyes. He listened for the hum of the deep, subterranean rivers that pulsed beneath the earth. Once, a young, ambitious merchant named Marcus mocked him. "Why waste your time, old man? The mountain is dry. We have dug everywhere, and there is nothing left but dust. The supply is gone." Elias smiled and tapped his rod against the ground. "You are digging into your own fear, Marcus. You see the surface, the dry crust, and you conclude that the earth is empty. You are looking for a puddle. I am listening for the river." Elias walked to a place where the rock was jagged and barren, the very place everyone else had abandoned. He began to clear the heavy, gray rubble that had fallen from the cliffside, stone by stone. It was tedious, back-breaking work. Days turned into weeks. Marcus continued to laugh, pointing to the dry dust beneath Elias's fingernails. "You are wasting your life on a ghost." But Elias did not stop. He was not looking for water. He was removing the obstacles that had prevented the water from surfacing. Finally, on the dawn of the 41st day, he pulled away a massive, rusted boulder that had been wedged against the vein of the mountain for centuries. There was a sound like a deep, long-held breath, and suddenly, crystal-clear water erupted from the stone, cold and pure, rushing down into the village, with such force that it carved a new path through the dry dirt. The village was transformed. The dry mountain had been hiding an inexhaustible supply the entire time. Elias turned to Marcus and said, "The river never stopped flowing. It was only the blockage of your own limited belief that kept you thirsty. You were fighting for a scarcity that did not exist. To embody this truth today, you must perform the dissolution of the dam. Whenever the thought of lack clutches at your mind, whenever you fear that the money will not be there, or the opportunity will pass you by, you are to place your hand on your solar plexus, the center of your personal power, and breathe. This is your warning sign that you are clutching the channel. Immediately speak this decree aloud. My supply is infinite, flowing from an inexhaustible source. I am not dependent on the channel. I am supported by the source. I release my grip, and I allow my good to flow to me with grace and ease. Visualize the dam of rocks, the fears, the worries, the old stories of not enough being washed away by the relentless, loving force of the river. Do not try to force the money or the outcome. Simply release the tension that is keeping it from you. You are clearing the path. You are becoming a magnet for the abundance that is already seeking you. You are now learning to trust the river, to stop the frantic, surface-level digging, and align yourself with the deep, inexhaustible well of the infinite. But even when you open the channels, the world will test your resolve. The external world, the old guard of reality, will try to convince you that you are foolish for trusting the unseen. The shadows will lengthen, and fear will whisper of your insanity. How do you maintain your course when the horizon is dark and the senses scream that you are walking toward a void? In the next chapter, we descend into the crucible of the soul. We will explore the nature of faith, not as a blind, passive hope, but as a muscular, iron-willed inner knowing that allows you to walk through the fire and emerge unscathed. Prepare your courage, for the path of the master requires the steady feet of one who walks by the inner flame, not the flickering lights of the world. Consider the mariner who sets sail at midnight, leaving the safety of the harbor for the vast, ink-black expanse of an uncharted ocean. There is no moon to guide his passage, no constellation to pin his course against the heavens. The water is a seamless void, and the horizon is a memory. To the rational mind, this is an act of madness. To the sailor, it is a calculation of deep internal certainty. He does not navigate by the visible landmarks, for the shore has long since vanished, nor does he fear the crushing weight of the depths beneath his keel. He moves by the steady hum of the compass needle, a small, trembling sliver of metal that points toward an unseen north. This is the state of the individual who has chosen the path of conscious creation. There is a precise, terrifying moment when the old world has been left behind, yet the new world has not yet materialized into the physical plane. It is the void of manifestation. The senses scream that nothing is happening, that the emptiness is evidence of failure, and that the silence is a sign of abandonment. Fear, the ancient sentinel of the ego, stands at the edge of this void, whispering that the sailor is lost, that the ship is sinking, and that return to the harbor is the only logical course. The paradox is this: the more brightly one shines their internal light, the more starkly the surrounding darkness appears. To walk by faith is to possess the audacity to trust the internal compass more than the roaring waves of external circumstance. It is the moment when you realize that what you cannot see is far more real and far more powerful than what you can. To understand the nature of faith, we must strip away the sentimental veneer that has obscured its true, muscular essence. Why is faith so often mistaken for a passive, blind, and fragile hope? Because the human collective has been taught to equate knowing only with seeing. We have been conditioned to accept that if a thing cannot be measured, weighed, or perceived by the five senses, it does not exist. However, we must ask, how does the psyche construct its reality? The reality we inhabit is not a collection of objective facts. It is a mental projection supported by internal belief. Faith is the psychological act of pre-accepting a reality that has yet to manifest in the physical world. It is the highest form of cognitive discipline. When we choose faith, we are essentially asserting that the blueprint of our desire is more fundamental than the current, transient state of our environment. Why does fear rise to challenge this? Fear is the ego's survival mechanism, triggered by the unknown. Because the ego is anchored to the past, it views the unknown as a threat to its existence. It demands evidence of the future before it will allow itself to feel secure. How, then, does one move past this? By recognizing that faith is not the absence of fear, but the conscious, moment-by-moment subordination of fear to the inner knowing. Faith is a muscle, and like any muscle, it atrophies when it is not exercised, and grows in strength when it is subjected to the resistance of doubt. How does the recursive logic of faith work? You choose to believe in the desired outcome, despite the contradictory evidence of your senses. This choice creates a new vibrational frequency. Your subconscious, observing this frequency, begins to reshape your internal landscape. This internal shift, in turn, subtly alters your external interactions, decisions, and perceptions. Eventually, the evidence of your faith begins to materialize. Faith, therefore, is the bridge between the invisible idea and the visible fact. To walk by faith is to walk as if you are already standing in the destination, even while your feet are still traversing the wilderness of the present. It is the ultimate act of defiance against the limitations of the physical world. In the annals of the high desert, there lived a master architect named Valerius. He was commissioned to build a temple in a land plagued by shifting sands and gale-force winds. Every previous attempt to build there had failed. The foundations would wash away in a single season, the stones would be buried by dunes, and the structures would crumble into the shifting ground. The people of the desert called the valley the Eater of Dreams. Valerius did not bring laborers, nor did he bring stone. He brought only a small, iron-bound chest and a compass. For months, he did nothing but sit in the center of the valley, observing the wind patterns and the migration of the sands. He sat in the blinding heat and the freezing cold, ignored by the nomads who watched him with pity. He was waiting for the true north of the earth, the bedrock that existed beneath the shifting topsoil. When he finally began to dig, he ignored the shallow, easy ground. He dug through the sand, through the loose gravel, and into the solid, ancient granite that lay deep beneath the valley floor. He did not build his temple on the ground that people could see. He anchored it to the ground he knew was there. As he built, the desert raged. The winds clawed at the walls, and the sands tried to swallow his progress. A group of skeptics came to him and shouted, "Look at your work! The wind is tearing it apart. The sands are rising. Your temple will be gone by dawn." Valerius, who was pouring mortar into the foundation, did not look up. He said, "You are looking at the desert. I am building upon the mountain beneath it. The desert is passing. The mountain is eternal." Years later, a great storm hit the valley, a storm of such ferocity that it reshaped the entire landscape. The dunes were leveled, and the surrounding plains were stripped bare. When the dust finally settled, the village was gone, and the nomads' tents were nowhere to be found. But there, standing untouched, unscathed, and perfectly centered, was the temple of Valerius. It had not been built to survive the desert. It had been built to rest upon the truth that existed long before the desert was born. He had built not with his eyes, but with his knowing. To embody this truth today, you must practice the pivot of presence. Throughout your day, you will be met with facts, the negative report, the delay, the criticism, the sudden obstacle. When these arise, you must acknowledge them, but refuse to marry them. Do not deny the reality, but do not grant it the authority to define your future. When the fear of the Eater of Dreams rises in your chest, when the world tells you that your project is failing or your path is foolish, you are to place your hand on your center and say, "I do not walk by the light of outer appearances. I walk by the steady flame of my inner knowing. The evidence of my senses is temporary, but the truth of my purpose is eternal." Treat every challenge as a test of your faith, a moment to exercise the muscle of your conviction. Do not fight the fear. Simply let it exist in the periphery while you keep your eyes locked on the unseen goal. Every time you refuse to be swayed by the chaos, you are cementing another stone of your own temple. You are now learning to walk with the steady, iron-willed gait of the master, refusing to be shaken by the flickering shadows of the material world. You have claimed your worth, mastered your speech, tuned your frequency, and aligned with the source. But what of the moments when the fire consumes your work? What of the chapters that seem to be nothing but loss, betrayal, or confusion? You have built your temple, but you have yet to learn the secret of the alchemist, the ability to turn even the most painful, dissonant experience into a vital element of your evolution. In the next chapter, we will transcend the binary of good and bad and learn the most advanced secret of the masters, that all things are working together for your highest evolution. Prepare your heart, for the fire is not there to burn you, it is there to refine you. Step into the cavernous depths of an ancient forge at the dead of winter. The air is thick with the acrid, metallic tang of sulfur, charcoal, and heated iron. Sparks cascade through the gloom like dying stars, thrown off by the rhythmic, deafening strike of a heavy hammer against an anvil. At the center of this crucible sits a piece of raw iron, plunged deep into the white-hot core of the furnace. To an untrained eye, the spectacle is one of pure, unmitigated destruction. The metal is subjected to an agonizing, blinding heat until its original form softens, glows, and appears to dissolve altogether. It is then dragged from the fire, only to be struck repeatedly, violently, by the blacksmith's hammer, before being plunged into an icy bath of water, hissingly releasing its agony in a cloud of choking steam. If the iron possessed a voice, it would scream that it was being murdered. It would cry out against the injustice of the heat, the cruelty of the hammer, and the sudden, freezing shock of the bath. It would label the blacksmith a tyrant and the forge a house of torture. Yet, observe the paradox. This process is not an execution, it is an ascension. The blacksmith is not destroying the metal, he is destroying its limitations. He is purging the impurities from its grain, aligning its molecular structure, and transforming a brittle, shapeless lump of earth into a flawless, unbreakable blade fit for a king. This is the great theatrical illusion of human suffering. When a door slams shut in our faces, when a relationship fractures into dust, a career collapses overnight, or a betrayal leaves the heart bleeding in the dark, the human mind immediately adopts the perspective of the screaming iron. It creates a narrative of victimhood, labeling the event as a catastrophic failure, a cosmic punishment, or an act of random malice. The paradox is absolute. The very events we classify as our undoing are frequently the precise, calculated pressures required to forge our divinity. The fire we dread is not our executioner, it is our liberator. Why does the human psyche instinctively label challenging, disruptive events as fundamentally bad? To deconstruct this phenomenon, we must look at the ego's evolutionary obsession with comfort, predictability, and control. The ego operates on a dualistic, binary framework. That which brings immediate pleasure or reinforces our current identity is labeled good. That which introduces pain, uncertainty, or forces a dismantling of our identity is labeled bad. It is a primitive, survival-driven classification system that is utterly blind to the long-term evolution of the soul. We must ask, how does this binary labeling freeze us in a state of perpetual suffering? The moment we label an experience as bad, we enter into a state of structural resistance against reality. We declare war on what is. This resistance generates a recursive loop of psychological suffering. The event occurs, we resist it. The resistance amplifies the pain, and the amplified pain serves as proof that the event was indeed catastrophic. We become trapped in the narrative of, why is this happening to me? This question is a dead end. It assumes the universe is a chaotic or malicious entity, and it strips the individual of their creative sovereignty, reducing them to a fragile casualty of circumstance. How do we break this loop and adopt the view of the spiritual alchemist? We must apply the recursive method of questioning to the very nature of life's events. We ask, what if everything in reality is not happening to us, but happening for us? If we accept this premise, the fundamental question shifts from a victim-centered, why is this happening to me, to a sovereign, evolutionary query. How is this event serving my growth? What hidden capacity is this pressure forcing me to develop? What outgrown version of myself is this fire burning away? Philosophical depth reveals that a closed door is rarely a rejection, it is an act of divine redirection. The universe, in its infinite, orchestrating intelligence, recognizes when we are attempting to build a home in a valley that is destined for a landslide. When we refuse to move out of comfort or fear, the universe uses the ultimate grace of disruption to shatter the illusion of safety, forcing us to stand up and walk toward our true destiny. Similarly, a delay is not a denial. It is the time required for the hidden pieces of the cosmic puzzle to align, or for the individual to develop the emotional maturity necessary to handle the weight of the dream they are chasing. By refusing to label the storm as an enemy, the alchemist changes their relationship to the fire. They realize that they are not the iron being destroyed. They are the consciousness witnessing the forging of the blade. They stop fighting the process and begin to co-create with it, standing in the center of the crucible with a quiet, unshakable trust that the master designer makes no mistakes. In the ancient, mountain-shadowed kingdom of Viridia, there lived a master weaver named Nicholas. He was celebrated across the lands for creating tapestries of such intricate beauty and profound depth that they seemed to breathe with life. Scholars and kings would travel for months just to sit in his studio and look upon his work. One day, a young apprentice named Thomas came to study under Nicholas. Thomas was brilliant but impatient, obsessed with symmetry, precision, and the avoidance of errors. He watched Nicholas work for weeks, marveling at how smoothly the golden, silver, and blue threads slid through the loom, forming pristine patterns of palaces, forests, and celestial bodies. During a great festival, Nicholas permitted Thomas to work on a grand tapestry destined for the High Emperor's palace. Thomas worked with a feverish devotion, determined to make it flawless. However, deep into the night, as fatigue clouded his vision, a heavy, unrefined thread of coarse, charcoal black wool became tangled in the shuttle. Before Thomas realized what had occurred, the rough, dark thread had been woven deep into the center of a pristine, sky-blue field, breaking the symmetry and creating a jagged, unsightly scar across the silk. When Thomas discovered the error at dawn, he fell into despair. He took a knife, intending to cut the dark thread out, which would have ruined the integrity of the entire piece. "The tapestry is ruined," he cried out as Nicholas entered the studio. "A terrible mistake has been made. The beauty is destroyed by this ugly, dark thread. I have failed." Nicholas walked to the loom, placed a calming hand on the young man's trembling shoulder, and looked at the blemish. He did not frown, nor did he scold. Instead, he smiled gently. "Do not cut the thread, Thomas. The only mistake you can make now is to believe that the dark thread has no purpose. You see it as a ruin because you are looking at it in isolation. Step back, and let us change the design." Nicholas took the shuttle himself. Instead of trying to hide or remove the rough, black wool, he began to weave around it. He used the jagged, dark line as the foundational shadow for a magnificent, rising mountain peak that he had not originally planned to include. He wove threads of deep crimson and burnt orange along its edges, turning the blemish into the very contrast that allowed a brilliant, hidden sun to pop with blinding realism. When the High Emperor received the tapestry, he did not praise the sky-blue silk or the golden patterns. He stood spellbound before the mountain peak, his fingers tracing the rough, charcoal thread. "This," the Emperor whispered, "is the soul of the piece. The contrast of this dark mountain makes the sky look infinitely deeper and more majestic than any sky I have ever seen. It is a masterpiece of balance." Thomas stood in the back of the hall, tears filling his eyes. He realized that the dark thread was not a mistake that ruined the silk. It was the unexpected gift that allowed the weaver to create something far greater than a flat, unblemished sky. It was the contrast that gave the masterpiece its soul. To embody the truth of the alchemist today, you must perform the ritual of reframing the shadow. Identify the most painful closed door, recent failure, or disruptive challenge currently occupying your thoughts. It could be a financial setback, a fractured relationship, or a prolonged delay that leaves you feeling stagnant and frustrated. Take a moment to sit quietly, close your eyes, and visualize this challenge, not as a random boulder dropped in your path to stop you, but as the rough, charcoal thread within your tapestry, or the heat of the forge refining your steel. Stop asking the universe to remove the fire. Instead, change the declaration of your heart. Place your hand upon your chest and issue this supreme decree to the silence of your morning studio. Nothing is happening against me. Everything is unfolding for my highest evolution. I retire the narrative of the victim. I accept the heat of the forge, and I trust the hand of the master weaver. Every closed door is my redirection. Every fire is my refinement. Feel the profound relief that accompanies the shift in perspective. You are ending your long, exhausting war with reality. You are no longer bracing for impact. You are stepping into your spiritual authority, looking at the chaos through the eyes of the designer, knowing that the plot of your life is crafted by a benevolent, infinite intelligence that intends for you to win. You are now learning to view your life through the eyes of the master weaver, recognizing the divine necessity of the contrast, the shadow, and the flame. You have established your wholeness, taken up your wand, tuned your frequency, cleared your channel, stood firm in your faith, and blessed the crucible of your challenges. Yet, even as you stand strong in this advanced awareness, a subtle, heavy residue often lingers from the battles of the past. The ghost of who you were yesterday, the memory of the mistakes you made, the regrets you carry, and the old identities you wore creeps into the clean slate of the morning, attempting to rewrite the new day in the faded colors of the old. You have mastered the alchemy of the present, but now you must learn the ultimate act of liberation, the total, unconditional gift of grace. In our next chapter, we descend into the mystery of the dawn reset. We will learn how to drop the chains of history entirely and step into the morning, not as a continuation of yesterday, but as a completely new being, born anew into a world of limitless potential. The forge is cooling. The dawn is breaking. Prepare to be undone by grace. Imagine a weary traveler standing at the edge of a vast, misty forest at the first gray light of dawn. Behind him lies a landscape of broken carts, abandoned tools, and the heavy, rusted chains of a long, arduous trek. He has carried these burdens for years, the weight of failed investments, the cold ash of scorched relationships, and the haunting, repetitive echoes of mistakes made in the dead of winter. He is hunched under the crushing density of his own history, his eyes fixed on the mud at his feet, convinced that the road ahead must be paved with the debris of the road behind. The paradox of the morning is this: the sun rises with absolute neutrality. It pours its liquid gold onto the just and the unjust, the victor and the defeated, with equal, uncalculating brilliance. It does not ask for a ledger of yesterday's sins. It does not demand an apology for last night's tears. It simply offers an invitation to begin. Yet, the traveler remains frozen. He stands in the center of a pristine, holy silence, yet he is vibrating with the frantic, discordant noise of his own regrets. He carries the dead weight of 1,000 yesterdays into the fresh, oxygenated air of a day that was born empty. He is a prisoner who refuses to walk out of the cell because he has grown comfortable with the weight of the iron shackles. The door is unlocked. The sun is risen. The path is clear. Why does the human heart find it so agonizingly difficult to simply begin again? To grasp the magnitude of grace, we must deconstruct the psychological prison of linear time. Why do we cling to our past like a sacred relic, even when that relic is the very anchor dragging us into the abyss? It is because the ego views our history as our identity. We are terrified that if we abandon the story of who we were, if we drop the chains of our previous failures, we will lose the only map we have for navigating our existence. We believe that by holding on to our regrets, we are learning. But in truth, we are merely rehearsing our own limitations. How does this recursive cycle of self-flagellation function? We experience a mistake, we attach an emotional charge of shame to it, and we store that shame in the sub-basement of the psyche. Then, every morning, we perform a memory audit, reviewing the files of our inadequacies to ensure we don't make the same mistake twice. But by focusing our consciousness on the failure, we inadvertently reissue the command to the subconscious to replicate the circumstances of that failure. We aren't learning from the past. We are binding ourselves to it. We are effectively trying to drive forward while staring exclusively at the rearview mirror, steering ourselves directly into the ditches we are trying so desperately to avoid. Why is grace the only logical solution to this madness? Philosophically, grace is the recognition that the universe is not a judge but a creator. If the universe were a judge, life would be a sentence. Because the universe is a creator, life is an opportunity. Grace is the scientific principle of the cosmic reset. Every sunrise is a literal, physical boundary. The earth rotates, the light shifts, the old energy is swept away by the sheer velocity of the planet's movement. To refuse this reset is to defy the physics of the cosmos. How do we embody this liberation? We must realize that becoming is a process of shedding, not adding. We do not need to fix our past, we only need to unhook from it. The past is not a reality, it is a memory. Memories are merely ghosts, shadows that have no substance, no power to act, and no authority to dictate the next moment. By declaring, "I am born anew," we are not lying. We are acknowledging the scientific fact that our cells are regenerating, our thoughts are shifting, and our environment is changing in every microsecond. To be a master of one's destiny is to grant oneself the absolute, divine permission to evolve. It is the realization that the person who went to sleep last night is technically a different entity than the one who woke up this morning. Grace is the recognition that you are not the sum of your history. You are the space in which your history occurs. In the coastal city of Seraphim, there stood the great library of records. It was a labyrinthine structure, housing millions of scrolls, each containing the account of every citizen's life, their public deeds, their private failures, and their most shameful secrets. The citizens of Seraphim lived in a state of perpetual, low-grade terror. They believed that their destiny was written in these scrolls, and that if they ever drifted too far from the path of their recorded self, they would be cast into the sea. Among them was a woman named Alara, who was known as the Scribe of Regrets. She had spent her life documenting every error of her youth, every harsh word spoken in anger, and every dream she had abandoned. Her scroll was so long it had to be carried by 2 servants, and it was said to be the heaviest account in the city. Alara felt she deserved the weight. She believed that to forget her past was to lose her soul. One night, a massive, celestial fire, a storm of fallen stars swept through the library. The structure was not leveled, but every scroll inside was turned to white ash. When the sun rose the following morning, the people of Seraphim rushed to the library, wailing in despair. Without their scrolls, they had no identity. They were terrified, lost, and trembling. They stood in the great hall, staring at the piles of gray dust that were once their lives, unsure of how to exist without the record of who they had been. Alara stood before her own mountain of ash. She picked up a handful of the white powder and watched it drift through her fingers. She suddenly realized that the weight she had been carrying for 40 years was gone. The records of her failures, her youthful betrayals, and her deepest shames were no longer in existence. She looked at her hands, they were trembling, yes, but for the first time in her life, they were light. She turned to the crowd, who were still weeping for their lost pasts. "Do you not see?" she asked, her voice clear as a bell. "We have been given the greatest gift imaginable. We have been granted the authority to write a new book, starting from the first page, without a single line of ink to bind us to who we were yesterday. We are not lost. We are finally free." Alara walked out of the library into the morning light, unencumbered, and for the first time in her life, she felt the wind on her back, without the weight of her history pulling her down. She did not know who she would be, but she knew, with absolute, terrifying beauty, that she was no longer the scribe of regrets. She was the author of the dawn. To embody this truth today, you must perform the ceremony of the ash. This is not a metaphor. It is an act of spiritual hygiene. Write down on a piece of paper the one regret, one failure, or one identity that has haunted you the most, the scroll that you keep reading to remind yourself of your limitations. Describe it in detail if you must, but own the fact that this is merely a memory, not a reality. Then, take this paper to a safe place and burn it. As you watch the flames consume the words, do not look at it with sorrow. Watch it with the detachment of a scientist observing an experiment. Acknowledge that the fire is not destroying your soul. It is destroying your cage. As the paper turns to ash, whisper to the morning air, I am not my history. I am not my patterns. I am not my regrets. This day is a clean slate. I am born anew. Feel the lightness in your chest as the smoke clears. You are not required to drag the heavy chains of who you were into this fresh, holy space. You are permitted to be patient, to be kind, to be courageous, and to be absolutely different than you were 24 hours ago. The universe does not hold your past against you. Why do you insist on holding it against yourself? You are now standing in the light of your own rebirth, free from the library of the past, holding the pen to write the first sentence of your future. But a master does not merely live in a state of individual freedom. A master understands the symphony. You have claimed your wholeness, wielded your word, tuned your frequency, cleared your channels, built upon your faith, alchemized your pain, and received the gift of grace. You are a sovereign creator, but you exist within a vast, interconnected, energetic structure. You have orchestrated the pieces of your own soul. Now, you must learn to harmonize them into a permanent, unshakable symphony of decrees. In the next chapter, we will synthesize these 7 truths into a cohesive, daily ritual of recalibration. We will show you how to maintain this state of sovereignty regardless of the chaos of the world. Prepare your spirit, for the final movement of the symphony is about to begin. Imagine standing in the center of a grand, celestial auditorium just as the first light of dawn spills through the vaulted stained glass. Before you, 1,000 instruments lie silent. The delicate strings of intuition, the thunderous brass of bold action, the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of discipline, and the ethereal woodwinds of gratitude. For years you have been a novice conductor, frantically waving your baton in the dark, trying to coax a melody from a chaotic, discordant ensemble that refuses to play in unison. You have heard the occasional haunting note of beauty, followed immediately by the grating screech of doubt or the hollow thud of apathy. You have wondered why, despite your best intentions, the music of your life never quite swells into the triumphant crescendo you know is possible. The paradox of your existence is that the orchestra is not broken, it is merely waiting for the score. You have been treating your life as a series of isolated, improvisational stabs at reality, failing to realize that the universe is a structural masterwork. It does not respond to the scattered, desperate pleas of a confused heart. It responds to the harmony of a resonant decree. The symphony of your life is already written in the ink of universal law. You are not the composer, you are the conductor. The tragedy is not that the music is absent, it is that you have spent your life playing out of time, out of tune, and out of rhythm with the divine order of the cosmos. To harmonize your life is not to invent a new song, but to align your every breath with the masterpiece that is already being played. Why is a systematic, daily structure of decrees necessary for the evolution of the soul? To answer this, we must look at the nature of entropy. In the physical universe, all systems tend toward disorder unless constant energy is applied to maintain their structure. The human psyche is no different. We are constantly bombarded by the entropic noise of the world, the subtle discouragements, the relentless marketing of lack, the collective fears of our social circles, all designed to pull our focus away from our own sovereignty and back into the collective drift of mediocrity. How does a symphony of decrees function as an anti-entropic force? It works by creating a container of high-frequency intention that acts as a spiritual buffer. When you recite your fundamental truths, your wholeness, your creative power, your gratitude, your infinite supply, your faith, your alchemical perspective, and your grace, you are not merely speaking, you are performing an energetic recalibration. You are systematically purging the dissonant debris of the previous day and tuning your consciousness to the fundamental key of your own divinity. Why must this occur as a daily, rhythmic recurrence? Because the mind is a creature of habit. It seeks the path of least resistance, which is always the path of the old, fearful self. If you allow a full 24 hours to pass without recentering, the subconscious will inevitably revert to its default settings of protection, contraction, and scarcity. The symphony is the practice of imposing order upon the chaos of the psyche. It is the ritual of the morning that establishes the prime of the day. How does the process of recursive decreeing the repetition of these 7 truths alter the physical architecture of the brain? Neuroplasticity confirms that repetition is the key to identity formation. By consciously voicing these decrees, you are carving deep, superhighway neural pathways in the brain. You are effectively programming your internal operating system to perceive the world through the lens of your spiritual authority rather than the lens of your physical history. You are moving from a state of being influenced to a state of being influential. The symphony is the daily maintenance of the master architect, ensuring that the structure you are building remains aligned with the blueprint of the soul. In the frostbitten north, there lived a legendary clockmaker named Thaddeus. His clocks were famous not for their aesthetic beauty, but for their uncanny, rhythmic precision. They were said to run for a century without losing a single second. When asked how he achieved such impossible harmony, Thaddeus would simply smile and point to the morning tuning. Every morning, before the city gates opened, Thaddeus would enter his workshop. He would not begin by working on a gear or polishing a casing. Instead, he would take his tuning fork, strike it against his workbench, and hold the ringing note in the air. He would listen to the pure, mathematical frequency, and then, one by one, he would adjust the pendulums and the mainsprings of every clock in his workshop, bringing them into exact, vibrating alignment with the sound of the fork. One winter, a terrible storm hit the city. The cold was so severe that the metal in the clocks began to warp, and the lubricants thickened. The entire shop began to rattle, tick, and moan in a cacophony of discord. The vibrations were so jarring that the clocks began to tear themselves apart, the gears grinding and slipping against one another. Thaddeus's apprentices panicked, rushing about to hammer the casings back into place, trying to hold the structures together with force. Thaddeus remained calm. He walked to the center of the room, struck his tuning fork with a firm, confident hand, and held it aloft. The pure, crystalline note pierced the chaos of the rattling gears. He did not touch a single clock with a tool. He simply let the sound ring out, again and again, refusing to be interrupted by the noise. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the vibrations of the sound began to exert a subtle, powerful influence on the stressed metal. Because the clocks were built on the principle of resonance, they could not help but respond. One by one, the pendulums stopped their erratic swinging and fell into the rhythm of the fork. The metal, under the influence of the sound, seemed to regain its alignment. By noon, the workshop was once again a temple of rhythmic perfection. Thaddeus turned to his apprentices and said, "You were trying to fix the gears by force. You did not understand that the clock is not the gears. The clock is the rhythm. When the rhythm is true, the gears will follow. Never mistake the outer manifestation for the inner cause. To embody this truth today, you must implement the ritual of the tuning fork. You are to compile these 7 truths, your 7 sacred decrees, into a personal liturgy that you speak aloud, with resonance and conviction, every single morning. Do not rush through them. Treat them as the tuning of your soul. Stand in a space of stillness. Take a deep, centering breath. Then, voice each decree as if you were commanding the universe to align itself to your command. Speak them with the authority of the master architect. Feel the vibration of each word in your chest, your throat, and your heart. I am a whole, perfect, and complete expression of the divine. My word is my wand. My subconscious is its faithful servant. Gratitude is my native tongue. It is the frequency of my reality. My supply is infinite, flowing from an inexhaustible source. I choose faith over fear. I walk by inner knowing, not by outer sight. All things are working together for my highest good. This day is a clean slate. I am born anew. As you speak, visualize these 7 truths as 7 golden strings in the instrument of your life. Feel them tightening and coming into perfect, harmonic tension. This is your symphony. This is your tuning. Do this every day until you no longer need the paper. Until the decrees are as much a part of you as the beating of your own heart. If you are ready to conduct the symphony of your own existence, if you are committed to the daily discipline of the Master, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. This is not just a digital gesture. It is your formal declaration of resonance, your way of saying, I am tuned, I am aligned, and I am ready. Join us as we complete this masterwork. You have now learned the secrets of the architect, the alchemist, and the conductor. You have built the temple and tuned the instrument, but there is one final, majestic truth that remains the culmination of all your labor. You are not just a user of these laws, you are the sovereign creator of your world. You stand on the precipice of a new existence, one where the universe does not just listen to your words, but responds with the full force of its creative power. In our final chapter, we will transcend the practice itself and step into the absolute, sovereign reality of the Creator. The symphony is reaching its final, resounding movement. Prepare for the ultimate revelation. Imagine a master glassblower standing at the precipice of the abyss, holding a long, hollow pipe tipped with a glob of incandescent, molten silica. The world around him is a swirling, chaotic expanse of raw, unformed substance, a tempest of light and shadow, wind and stillness, opportunity and obstacle. He does not fear the chaos. He does not brace against the wind. With a grace that defies the tension of the moment, he applies his lips to the pipe and begins to breathe. This is the breath of the sovereign creator. As he exhales, the raw, formless substance before him begins to glow, to expand, and to take shape, mirroring the secret geometry of his inner vision. There is no separation between the breather and the breath, between the creator and the creation. The paradox is profound. Most individuals look at the world and ask, "What will you do to me today?" While the sovereign creator stands in the center of the storm and asks, "What shall I breathe into existence?" To be a master of one's world is to realize that the chaos is not a threat. It is the raw material of your next masterpiece. You are not a spectator watching the play of life from the wings. You are the playwright, the lead actor, and the director, standing on a stage that is being built the moment your feet touch the boards. The void is not empty. It is pregnant with your own next declaration. To reach the pinnacle of sovereignty, we must deconstruct the final, most tenacious delusion of the human ego, the belief in otherness. Why does the psyche struggle to fully inhabit the role of the creator? Because it is tethered to the duality of subject and object. We believe that we are the subject and that the world, the economy, our circumstances, our history is an object that exists independently of our influence. This is the root of all powerlessness. How does the sovereign creator dissolve this duality? By applying recursive logic to the nature of perception. If your world is a reflection of your internal state, if the outer is simply the inner projected onto the canvas of time and space, then there is no other. The world is not a foreign entity to be negotiated with. It is a mirror to be recognized. Why do we hesitate to claim this? Because with absolute sovereignty comes absolute responsibility. If you are the creator, you cannot blame the mirror for the reflection. You cannot curse the weather for your own coldness. How does one move into this state? By embracing the realization that responsibility is responsibility, the capacity to choose your response to every atom of your existence. Why is the sovereign creator's work never finished? Because the universe is not a static sculpture. It is a living, breathing, evolving dance. The creator understands that every moment is a negotiation with the infinite. The how of this mastery is the practice of total presence. The sovereign does not live in the memory of past creations or the anticipation of future manifestations. They live in the now, where the creative power is always at its zenith. To be sovereign is to cease the quest for permission. You do not need the world to validate your worth, the economy to grant you prosperity, or the people in your life to act in accordance with your desires. You move through the world with the quiet, devastating authority of one who knows that the reality they occupy is generated by the light they carry. You are not trying to change the world, you are changing the source of the world. When you shift, the reflection shifts. When you evolve, the universe evolves. This is the ultimate, recursive loop of the master. The more you manifest, the more you realize that the manifestation was never the point. The point was the expansion of your own consciousness, the honing of your own ability to breathe life into the void. In the silent, star-drenched heights of the celestial mountains, there lived an entity known as the Weaver of Tides. He was said to have built the stars, the moons, and the very fabric of the currents that move the oceans. For eons, he worked in total seclusion, weaving the complex patterns of existence. One day, a young, curious traveler climbed the impossible peaks to reach the Weaver's study. He found the Weaver standing at a loom that stretched into infinity, his fingers moving with a rhythm that felt like the beating of a heart. The traveler watched for hours, mesmerized, until he finally gathered the courage to ask, "Why do you weave, Great One? Is it for the glory of the stars? Is it for the balance of the tides? Is it for the sake of the galaxies?" The weaver did not stop his work. He looked at the traveler with eyes that held the depth of 1,000 nebulae and said, "I do not weave for the stars. The stars are merely the result of the motion." "Then do you weave for the worlds?" The traveler pressed. "Do you weave for the civilizations that rise and fall within your patterns?" The weaver shook his head. "The worlds are merely the canvas. I do not weave for the canvas." The traveler was confused. "Then what is the purpose? What is the prize of this eternal labor?" The weaver paused, and for the first time, the loom slowed its frantic pace. He reached out and touched the traveler's own chest, where his heart pulsed with life. "I weave because I am the movement itself. I weave to know the shape of my own reach. I weave because there is no weaver without the weaving, and there is no weaving without the courage to begin. The creation is not a product, it is a conversation between my will and the void. I am not the master of the world. I am the world dreaming itself into form." The traveler fell to his knees, realizing that the quest he had undertaken, the search for the source of creation, was the very thing that had kept him from his own creative power. He had been looking for a god in the loom when he should have been looking for the weaver in the mirror. He stood up, turned away from the mountain, and began the descent back to his own life, not as a seeker anymore, but as a man who understood that he carried the loom within his own breast. To embody this truth today, you must assume the crown of the sovereign. You are to move through your day with the internal posture of a master who has nothing left to prove. When you encounter a challenge, a difficult person, a daunting task, a moment of profound uncertainty, do not react. Stop. Breathe. Remind yourself, I am the source. This person, this challenge, this situation is not an obstacle. It is a segment of the canvas waiting for my brush. Ask yourself, if I were the master of this moment, how would I paint it? Then, act with that authority. Speak with that conviction. Do not look to the world for the result. Look to your own intention as the cause. You are the final authority in your reality. Take this power into your own hands. Claim your role as the deliberate creator. As you step out into the world today, carry this one, final, echoing truth in the chambers of your heart. If you truly knew the universe was listening to your every word, what beautiful, magnificent, and daring truth would you choose to speak next? The manuscript is finished. The work has only just begun. You are the architect of your own eternity. The pen is in your hand. Write. If this journey has permanently altered the landscape of your consciousness, if you have recognized the weaver within the mirror, I invite you to leave a final testament in the comments below. I am the sovereign creator. Let these words be the last decree of this chapter and the first command of your new life. Our work together here reaches its conclusion, but the symphony you are conducting is infinite. Stay awake, stay sovereign, and above all, stay brilliant.